everyone, and Happy New Year. Welcome back to This Week in Enterprise Tech. I'm Hyoun Park from Amalgam Insights here with Charlie Araujo. How are you, Charlie?
I am good. I'm good. It is snowing here in New York City. We got snow right before Christmas, so we had a white Christmas,
Oh,
and
lovely.
it was a nice little break. I got sick, so that part was not fun, but other than that, it was a nice little break, and it's been busy. It's already been a busy start of the year, and I'll be sharing more about that in the next couple of weeks, next couple episodes. But lots of good stuff, so I'm ready to get into it.
All right.
How
We're
about
ready
you?
for the spoilers whenever you're ready to dish. But yeah, it was a good holiday season for me as well. I got to meet up with family and got to watch the wild, wild world of tech unfold, even as we were on vacation. And I think,
Always no shortage, right?
yes, absolutely. Surprisingly, a couple of big things happened in tech, especially at the national level. So I'm going to dig right in with two articles that I thought were related. The first has a pretty salacious title around Pornhub, the notorious pornography site being basically banned in Florida because of the more relevant piece that Florida is putting in identity and age related mandates for the content that is coming into Florida and whatever is considered adult by Florida standards. Of course, porn falls into that, as is whatever they decide is adult worthy. So, that's one piece of the puzzle that is going to be an interesting issue for businesses to look at from a content perspective as these content issues start becoming a bigger and bigger deal for the internet.
Yeah, I do think it's interesting. This is to a certain extent, it's salacious, but it's also easy pickings because, nobody's going to argue that porn is something that you would potentially want to keep from kids and what have
Right.
you. But I think the slippery slope here is, and this is going to lead into the other conversation about net neutrality, right? The slippery slope is that I have a libertarian streak when it comes to a lot of the regulatory sort of view of this, because if we are relying on the government to regulate what content can or can't be consumed, it's very, very challenging. And I don't believe in no regulation, but it becomes this not only cat and mouse game, but questionable use of resources. Um, and this article points out, in fact, that there's a 1,200% increase in VPN usage in Florida. Shocker, shocker, because of course there's a whole bunch of people there that want to access this content. And so the question is, is this really good use of anybody's resources? And is this a good use of the regulatory engine, which can only regulate so many things in so many ways? Is this really the best way of doing that? And I think it's going to be interesting. And I think that the net neutrality, I mean, the stuff does matter, right? Because
Right.
again, that slippery slope nature, every single business is increasingly relying on internet driven traffic to transact their business. And so I think while most of us would probably say, oh, this is not anything we are subject to, there's a whole lot of different avenues where this can take place. The net neutrality is a much more classic example of this, where suddenly in this case, the opposite, right? The banning of net neutrality, which was a
Mhm.
regulatory schema that basically said that if you were effectively a utility provider, a provider of internet service, that you had to provide equal access. And now suddenly, if you don't, then there's all kinds of different caveats where it's like, well, are my competitor sites, or if I'm using, I don't even know who we use Spectrum, right? Whoever owns them. But if they have a service that they feel is competitive to something else, are they going to start diminishing my ability to access that? And by the way, like I have no other options. They're the only people I can use. And so, it's all of these different factors. And I think if you're a CIO today, it's one of those very challenging parts because you have no direct control over any of this. And yet you have to figure out how do you respond and manage it if it is in fact impacting your business in some way.
Right. So if you're somebody like Comcast, you might want to put the screws on, say, Netflix, and say, hey, we're suddenly gonna have a new Comcast tax for your content. That's a super obvious example. But even going down the rabbit hole from a content perspective, if you are Salesforce or you're ServiceNow or you're a big SaaS company that does a lot of traffic because you're in the cloud over a network, does a network now say, hey, as a business content provider, we're going to charge you extra to run over our network for all of your thousands of customers? Or if you're doing something that is regulated, going back to the Pornhub example, do you now have to do agent identity regulation for all of your content because you are doing something that's government related or otherwise health insurance related, something that requires additional verification above and beyond the username and password and two-factor authentication that we take kind of for granted at this point? Do you have to do additional work to actually collect licenses now, or driver's licenses or passports? This is a weird new world for content compared to what we have been dealing in recent years. And although this isn't going to affect everybody immediately, I do think there are enough issues that CIOs have to really start thinking, okay, what else are we going to have to deal with?
Yeah, the counterpoint is that the whole new net neutrality thing, I have not spent a whole lot of time and energy on it, mostly because it is a theoretical battle in that, at least as far as I'm aware, no one's ever been proven to actually be doing any of this, right? It's a regulation to solve a problem that has not yet existed. And it was this idea that hey, we're starting to have these critical technology services that were foundational to the fabric of society in the hands of a very small number of companies who could therefore take like a monopolistic sort of attitudes towards how they yield it or wield it, I guess. And so the big question, particularly on the net neutrality one, so I think this is where they diverge a little bit, the identity one versus net neutrality, is would they, right? What are the potential ramifications? And I think the PR hit would be so huge that I actually don't believe that it's going to happen, but it's still an interesting aspect. And again, the question is, if you're a CIO, what is it that you can do to try to manage it?
Yes, but at the very least, I definitely recommend, if you're on the corporate side, your corporate legal team should take a look at that 6th district court ruling, basically ruling out net neutrality. It's part of a bigger constitutional issue that we basically are saying that federal departments should not have as much power over companies based on a Supreme Court decision made last year regarding the Chevron decision, which previously said that federal agencies should have power to independently do things. We're obviously, with the Supreme Court that we have in the United States and the upcoming presidency of Donald Trump, obviously we're going to see less regulation in those regards, which means in practice, a lot of federal agency rules that have not been set by Congress or the normal law building process are now kind of at risk. And net neutrality is one of the most relevant examples for the tech world.
All right, I hope you got your fix. I know you like talking about this big picture, politically driven stuff, but we have some industry news to talk about, and let's shift gears a little bit. Oh, yeah, I know. So right before we went on break, or maybe right as we went on break, so we hadn't had a chance to talk about it, the beginning-ish of December, Google announced some new announcements, actually a whole bunch of them, Gemini 2.0 and Project Astra. And I don't want to go into all of it, but I'm specifically referencing an article from the MIT Technology Review talking about the announcements and sort of gushing. The article title was Google's new Project Astra could be generative AI's killer app. And in there, I'm a student of headline writing, and this was a brilliant headline because it speaks to two really fundamental things that sort of underpin or this undercurrent within this whole sector. The first, as we talked about, is generative AI has loads and loads of potential, all of this power, and yet organizations have struggled to find ROI, have struggled, we talked about this in a number of different forms over the last year, have struggled to actually say, hey, X plus Y equals, this big outcome when we do this. And so it points to that this lack of this sort of killer app that something that drives demonstrable, easily quantifiable value and return has been elusive. And could this, in fact, be the thing that starts breaking that? And the second thing that it really points to is that Google, despite being Google, which is still shocking to me because they are Google, but Google has like never quite caught up.
Mhm.
And I start to wonder, are they going to be the Kodak that, invented the digital camera but failed to recognize its disruptive power of our modern era, right? Because they had teams developing AI technology long before most of the current major players, and yet they have just always struggled to sort of be relevant in these conversations. We spend a ton of time talking about it, and we're rarely talking about Google. So what is interesting about this is that Project Astra represents sort of the convergence of a whole bunch of different pieces of technology, and there's a whole lot to the announcement. Read the article, video generation, and all kinds of different things. But Project Astra is designed to be the sort of ubiquitous assistant. It can look at a picture, you can show it, you turn your video camera on and show it. Here's a bottle of wine. Can you tell me if it's a good one? I'm having this for dinner. Will it go with it? I'm trying to figure out this recipe. What do I need for it? And so it's this idea of this assistant that can use multimodal inputs, video, pictures, sound, everything, and you can have this interaction. And of course, the article points out that it was incredibly buggy. So it was,
Mhm.
on the one hand, incredibly powerful and shocking. And then also it kept dropping into speaking in Mandarin for no good reason, right? And so all these kind of weird parts to it. So I just felt it was really interesting on both aspects of this. One, indicative of where things are going, and two, indicative of how much Google continues to struggle to compete in this space.
Yeah, Google. I found the Astra project to be really interesting because it is multimodal and multi-sensory in nature, both looking at sight and sound, which are the two senses that computers are best at right now. And I think there's a very interesting niche area in here where the assistant is helping with short-term memory, actually. Being able to say, here's what you've done and looked at over the past 10 minutes of video, I believe the article said. And when you think about, hey, what was that thing I was just thinking about? Or what was that thing I was just looking at? Yeah, Astra could provide a very interesting primary use case in being able to help you with what were you trying to contextualize, or what were you just looking at, or what was that thing that you were just trying to do but weren't quite sure what you were trying to do. But I will say my big caveat is that that's a very emerging type of primary technology that we don't quite understand how to really use. And I feel like that's been a problem for Alphabet when you look across a variety of things they've done, like Google Fiber, fantastic idea, but they could never really scale it past the city. Waymo, on the Alphabet side, fantastic idea, but right now it's only in a couple cities because it ends up being extremely compute and effort intensive to figure out how to map an entire city for automated cars. And this is going to be a similar thing. A very interesting technology with a lot of potential right now, but it has to be productized to more than a very specific use case. And I feel like that productization and scaling has been where Google has really struggled. The primary technology, fantastic, actually. Google has done a lot of primary technology work and research work to shape the AI world that we are currently in, but that productization, oh, I want Google
Well, I
to
mean, that's what
succeed,
I
but it's
yeah, I
so
mean, I think
hard.
that's part of their problem. They almost feel like a university now, like a research center where they're doing this stuff. Because I agree. I mean, but the challenge, and I have full faith that we will see this future at some point. But there's lots of pieces that are missing, right?
Mhm.
I'm not going to walk around with my phone and show it everything. I mean, who's going to do that, right? So that means I need some form of wearable device. I need the technology of glasses or something else to come. I need the ability to then have some kind of a screen that I can see or audio input without it being, like one of those people talking on the phone on loudspeaker down the street. I mean, there's all these moving parts. And with what they're demonstrating it literally, it puts the large in an LLM. I mean, it's like you need a massive data set to cover that much ground, and that, right? It's the opposite of where we're seeing people go, which is where they're trying to create more narrow banded use cases so that they can bring down the inference cost and all those other pieces. So it's like, it's this great theoretical exercise and it's incredibly impressive. But to your point, it's like, is that something we're realistically going to bring to market, and who's going to pay for it? And so I think those are the challenges, and this is where they have continued to struggle. And we'll see. But I did find it interesting to see that this particular, and look, I have a lot of respect for MIT Tech Review. So when they come out and say, "Is this the killer app?" Is this something that, could they cross the chasm with this and actually be the thing that breaks through? I'm skeptical, but it was still encouraging and interesting. Sort of the other end of the spectrum, we had another big announcement around the sort of space from another big giant in the now AI space, and that was Salesforce doing something almost the complete 180-degree opposite of what Google is doing here. And that is I think within 60 days from the announcement and launch of Agentforce, have rolled out Agentforce 2.0.
2.0, yeah.
And I mean, talk about a rapid iteration cycle and a meaningful release. I mean, I think it lived up to the 2.0 indicator. It was a pretty significant evolution of the product. I do find it interesting that they announced that originally they were going to hire 1,000 salespeople. They then coupled this announcement with the fact that they're going to double that to 2,000. And what was absent was any sales data, any indication of, is Agentforce actually getting any traction? And so the skeptic in me said it was 2.0 a rapid response to the fact that people looked at 1.0 and said, this ain't cutting it. Don't know. I have no idea if that's the case. But I do think it was very interesting. But clearly directionally the right area, right? A lot more natural language, a lot more fluidity and ease of use. Some of the things that were challenging in the first iteration.
Yes. So, so in all, just to keep everything above board, I will disclose that Salesforce is a current client of mine. And I was both at Dreamforce and at the Agentforce 2.0 event that they had here in San Francisco a couple of weeks ago. And I would say that comparing Agentforce, original Agentforce to Agentforce 2.0, both were very similar in terms of how you create the agent. The agent creation is actually very simple. You type in your use case and you ask for some help in being able to dig into a website or dig into a topic. And based on the data that the agent has available to it, it will start giving you answers. So for instance, I asked Agentforce 2.0, what is Amalgam Insights used for? And it tells me, yeah, oh yeah, they look at FinOps and they look at AI. It's like, yes, that's exactly what I look at. You looked at all my blog posts and my website stuff, and you told me what I do and how to work with me. That's fantastic. All that's good. I would say that the biggest technical change that Agentforce did that I found really interesting was that the original agent was based on chain of thought, which was one linear chain of thought that goes through the agent and basically works as automation. Similar to the robotic process automation, honestly, that we have seen for many, many years. This new agent, Agentforce 2.0, is more iterative. It will iteratively contextualize your agent. And if you are going through a process and something changes or your request changes or you ask for new data to come in, it can actually change to some extent based on the generative AI prompting and your requests and what is actually needed at that point. So I think that's an interesting step forward in creating an agent that is more reflective of how we actually work and change our minds and might request new information over time.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting. They also, as part of this announcement, they're clearly expanding the footprint to the rest of their ecosystem. So they're now leveraging the MuleSoft to enable workflows across the ecosystem. Tableau for some of the analytics and insights. You can now use Agent for that, and you can use agents specifically with Slack skills to have it, for instance, send a Slack message and what have you. So they're clearly going down that road. What I was struck by the fact, and I think this was missing in the 1.0 version, that they are, while they're certainly talking about broader use cases conceptually, where their power truly is when you leverage it within the Salesforce ecosystem, when it
Mhm.
has this reputable, authoritative data source that it can rely on and build upon. And so I think they're going to find a lot of success at that level. And, their footprint is big enough that that covers a lot of ground. Um, so I think that's useful, and it gives you then the opportunity to build some very specific targeted use cases. And I look at things as a spectrum. And on the one hand, you have the build your own custom solutions. On the other end, you have AI applications. And I put what they're doing right kind of smack in the middle, where it's not a completely out of the box, plug it in and get value solution. You have to do some heavy lifting, a lot of heavy lifting, frankly. But you can also use it for things that are much more customer oriented, and they have some really good use case examples around that.
Mhm.
That you couldn't get an off the shelf solution to just from like an AI application to do. And so I think that it's we're starting to see this sort of spectrum play out, and I think they're going to be carving out a good position.
Yeah, and I think from a business perspective, talking about 1,000 salespeople, 2,000 salespeople, my very lizard brain from an enterprise sales perspective says an enterprise salesperson tends to have $1 million quota. So if you're talking about 1,000 salespeople, that's $1 billion commitment. But you've got to onboard people as well. So if you want to get to $1 billion in sales this year, how many people do you have to hire? 1,000 immediately, you might say, and then maybe you up it to 2,000 once you realize you have to onboard them. And that's kind of where my math brain went to, is that Benioff literally wants $1 billion in AI sales this year, and you do that by hiring 1 to 2,000 salespeople.
Which leads to the question in another article. So CIO had an article that I think is going to become incredibly relevant around this. And the
Mhm.
article was titled, How Will AI Agents Be Priced? And that CIOs need to pay attention. And this, I think, may be the Achilles heel of the Agentforce structure. So Agentforce is priced on well, let me back up. So this article talks about the fact that we're seeing that one of the things that AI is doing is that we're seeing a lot of experimentation with pricing models. So historically, we had this really arcane approach, right? OpenAI came to market using a tokenized model for pricing,
Mhm.
and nobody understood what the hell it is. I don't understand how the hell it works. It's like roughly character based, sort of based on input and output, and it makes zero sense in terms of. I mean, to a techie, I get it. To a business person, it's like I have no idea how to estimate what that's going to cost me. And
Yes.
so we're
Every
seeing this
six
sort of
characters,
evolution.
it costs this much. Like, I don't know what a
Oh,
character. I don't know how
yeah,
many
exactly.
characters.
And how many interactions am I going to have? And I can't control how much the stupid AI spits back, and all of it. It's just so there's all those pieces, and so you're seeing all these different layers of different approaches. So some are approaching from an infrastructure perspective, some are approaching it from a more traditional consumption based model. You have people like Sierra, the former co-CEO of Salesforce, has now started a company called Sierra that is focused on contact centers, and they are outcome based. How many calls did their AI agent deflect from your contact center? And Salesforce is pricing on I guess you'd consider it a conversation, but every interaction. But it's I forgot it's like $4 a conversation. It is not cheap. So to me, the Achilles heel is, I'm a believer in the conversation model insofar as I'm now getting to an output, maybe not an outcome, but at least an output, right? It's not just a single interaction, the token based, but that's still a lot of money. And it speaks to how expensive all of this is. And, but I was sitting there doing the math, and, I think those sales reps are not going to have any trouble hitting their $1 million quotas, but they might have trouble with the renewals because people go, holy crap, am I getting that much value out of it? And we're seeing it right now with, Microsoft struggling with their $30 a month Copilot fee and a lot of downward pressure there. And so this is going to be the big challenge, and that's really what this article was pointing to. And I thought it was dead on in that this is, we're getting to this point where people are looking at operationalizing, and when you go to operationalize, the first question you ask is, how much is this going to cost me?
Yeah, I'm going to try to make this quick, but there's this. pricing evolution that tends to happen as technology goes from introductory to mature, where we start with kind of tokenized utility use, the API-based use, the tokenized costs that made no sense to us. Often there will be this intermediate bridge where we have this cost-based pricing, which is a fool's game. Everybody who has an MBA in pricing looks at cost-based pricing and basically says, oh, you have no idea what you're doing because you're not basing this on value. You're literally just basing this on how much it costs you because you have no idea what kind of value you actually have for your product.
Exactly.
Yes. But the more relevant ones are either that you're trying to replace work, which is what Salesforce is trying to do. They're basically saying, we think it costs you whatever, $5 to take a call. So if we charge you $4 to answer a question instead, that's how we're grabbing that amount of value. Or so you can say you're saving whatever 10 minutes of time, $5, something like that. You can also look at pricing based on outcomes, which is not simply did I take the call, but did I solve the customer's problem? This is obviously a harder thing to solve, but I guess if you looked at closed cases rather than simply interactions, you might be able to charge based on closed cases. But eventually you get to a mature point where all of that is taken for granted and you basically have to go to unlimited usage at the end of the day, which is what, typical SaaS pricing, which is what people actually want because it's predictable and you know what you're trying to get done and you have an idea of how much you're going to be using it. But you can't really get to that unlimited usage SaaS pricing until you really know how much is your value you're providing, right?
I do think it's interesting, and I think that the one, and I think the article sort of addressed this, but I feel like it didn't come through quite as much as I would have liked, is that we're not going to end up with one pricing schema. We're not going to normalize against anything because AI is this massive category with thousands and thousands of potential use cases, and every use case has the potential for a different pricing model based on how defined I can make it and how, or not. And so I think that's going to be the interesting and challenging part. And if you are a CIO, you nailed it. And I say this repeatedly: the name of the game is simplicity and predictability, and they go hand in hand, right? The more complex it is, the less predictable it becomes because I don't know all the moving parts. And so, but the hard part right now for AI in particular, as opposed to say cloud, where you had this scale covered so many of those knowledge gaps, right? Because I could create this scale where as my scale increased, my cost went down. AI, it's almost the opposite. And my scale increases, my costs go up. And so that makes this very, very challenging in the short term. And I actually fully expect that we'll see a couple burnouts where we see companies that have misjudged it and are going to be like the restaurant that had amazing food and everybody loved it and they go out of business because they couldn't make any money. And so, I think we're going to see some of that. But I think as a CIO, you need to be really looking hard and asking yourself, how are you? And I loved what you said, that the cost plus means you don't know how you generate value. I think the CIO is also going to have that challenge. It's like you need to understand for every single AI implementation that you go down the road on, every AI you implement, you need to understand explicitly how you as an organization are going to get value from it so that you can quantify it and compare it to the cost model. And that may not be an outcome driven or even output driven. It may be something like a conversation because that's how you can align it. But whatever it is, you have to get those in alignment. And that's where I think Salesforce could go off the rails here because I'm not sure that's going to be aligned. But
yeah, there's this article in Harvard Business Review, probably about 20 years ago now, by John Gorville, who said that innovators have to provide basically 9 times the value that the customer compared to the price, partially because they are overweighting their own value by 3x, and consumers are underweighting by 3x, a third, because they are unsure of the benefits that they're going to get. So you've got to provide 9x value for an innovative new product for a customer to feel comfortable buying it. And I'm not sure that something like $4 a use case provides enough of a leeway for an innovative customer to say, I'm going to move forward with this. But I do think that's kind of the expectation. If you're paying for something that's $100 a month as a business user, I don't think it's unreasonable to say, yeah, I'm expecting like $1,000 of value from this, because that's kind of the expectation we have from SaaS nowadays.
Yeah. Yep, definitely going to be interesting to see how this plays out. And I think that one of the things that we're seeing across the board with AI is this evolution of thought as we're having to sort of relearn things or look at them fresh. And so I wanted to give a bit of a drive-by to this, and I hate having to reference anything on Twitter or now X, but I'm going to anyway because I particularly like this one. So Aaron Levie, the CEO of Box, actually did this post, and it was a simple post. There's nothing outrageous about it, but it's about something that we've been talking about that was really broke news about 2 months ago with both OpenAI and Google, where they had models that could now use the tools of a computer. Right, they could do the computer use and use a browser and do all that. And I remember I probably even said it on the show where it's like, I said, why would you want that? It's like, that's the opposite of what I want, right? I want this thing. But he makes this point in this X post that the reason is that the alternative is to actually understand and anticipate everything that a user might need to do and ensure that you have APIs and connectors to all of those use cases. And I think in an enterprise, that is not an unreasonable thing, right? Going back to what we're talking about, if I'm trying to make an investment and I need to understand the value, well, that means I need to be able to quantify the use case and deconstruct it in a way that I should be able to do that. But if I think in terms of the OpenAI or the more general, like the Project Aster we're just talking about, where that use case could be anything, and there's no way I can ever really anticipate all the different mechanisms, that this ability to use the browser and use the computer to act as if I had a really smart friend who I just asked to go do this and could figure it all out makes a lot of sense, because I try to sort of trading one complexity for another, but I skip all of the complexity that I have to build in advance and instead build this layer that can simply go use the computer to do it. And so I wanted to give it, just because, major props. I consider myself fairly up to date on this stuff. And like, I was like left going, I don't get this at all. And this was a light bulb moment for me. It's like, I understand where this could be of value. And so I wanted to kind of acknowledge it.
Yeah, it bridges this value gap that has been in application integration tools for a long time. So we look at Workato or MuleSoft or SnapLogic or whatever, all these tools, Informatica, all these tools out there that help with application integration, but they can't really help with the user, general user trying to figure out, how do I get to 9 different sources and actually put it all together in a context that makes sense for me. We've always had to do this through this abstracted technology layer and then kind of build the context from scratch with this last mile application or this last mile contextualization by users or citizen developers or what have you. But now generative AI could potentially bridge that gap with the assistance of AI agents that are taking some control of the computing interface to actually access what you're looking for. So kudos. Hope Aaron actually makes some progress on this, since he happens to own this company called Box that does have a lot of enterprise content and has to support a lot of these integrations as well. It'd be great for you to 10x or 100x your company by making this practical, Aaron. Go get it.
All right. Well, we're going to wrap up on a couple of more theoretical notes, but we have one more piece of industry news that you wanted to bring up. And this was the roller coaster of the end of year for a company called Bench.
Oh, poor
Bench Accounting, I
Bench.
guess.
Yes.
Yeah. So
So
why don't you tee it up and explain why you want to talk about it?
for those who you don't know, Bench is a small, medium business accounting solution that has been helping with accounting and auditing, successfully raised $100 million and got thousands of customers. But on December 27th, they suddenly sent a note right before the end of the year saying, sorry, we're insolvent. We're going to try to support you, but you got to get off this platform as soon as possible. And everybody's wondering, what the heck happened? We trusted you. A lot of people trusted you. And actually, they were bought a few days later by an opportunistic company. So the service will be maintained. But what led to this crazy roller coaster of a ride at the end of the year when everybody's trying to just figure out how to close the books for next year? And they ran into this problem that I think is going to come up a lot more in 2025. Is simply that Bench was overstretched. They took a venture loan, and that loan came due, and the bank said, "I'm sorry, we're either gonna collect the money now or close down your company. There's no in between." And between venture capital expectations, too many companies that have been running unprofitably, and the end of zero interest rate economics, we're going to see a real issue here with a lot of innovative and smaller companies that may have taken business more quickly than they can afford to.
Yeah, I do think it's, if you haven't done it yet, it is definitely time to go look at your portfolio of partners and make sure that there is some profitability health, or at the very least, an extremely long runway. And it's hard if you're working with startups, you don't always have access to that information. I mean, we've talked in the past where we're seeing a bit of a migration back towards the major players, and this is part of the reason is that as we've moved out of this era where money was flowing cheaply and everyone could always go and count on, as long as you weren't just completely blowing it, you could count on another round. Suddenly, that's no longer the case. And so companies that had been following the kind of playbook of grow at all costs, didn't worry about making any money, about any degree of profitability, or even any sense of cash flow positivity, just spend to acquire the market. Those companies have had, and I think that there's risk, and I think in many cases that's a cultural dynamic where they've had trouble pivoting away from that.
Yeah.
Um, and so, I think if you're a CIO, you need to be doing your best to do some due diligence here and figure out where your risk points are. And this was obviously focused on small, medium companies, but there are plenty of companies that focus on the enterprise that I think are teetering very close to the same sort of point.
Yes, the irony is that as a startup a founder, you always say there's no plan B. Well, as a CIO, you have to ask for plan B. There has to be a backup plan. At the very least, somebody with either deep pockets, or maybe they are backed by a Salesforce Ventures or a Workday Ventures or a ServiceNow Ventures. So there's some deep pockets who are interested in maintaining that service, regardless of the short-term profitability of the actual organization.
Yeah, it is challenging though. I mean, as we've talked about, Google, who clearly has deep pockets, has a propensity of shutting down their services just as much. So,
Mm-hmm.
it's a tough space all the way around. But the upside there is at least you get noticed when it's up something like Google instead of this. Oh, by the way, we're gone tomorrow. But
Right.
anyhow, all right. So we have three articles that we'll sort of talk about, I guess, together because it's really about where is the future of all of this taking us. AI is one of those. I actually find that whole AI space completely fascinating because it is simultaneously so overhyped and so overblown, and at the same time so truly transformative. I really
Mhm.
believe that there is so many kernels of truth in all that hype, and so that it makes it quite challenging to sort it out and to figure out which parts of this are real and which parts of it are not. And it's not about anyone blowing smoke, it's about where is the impact going to actually be felt and have a meaningful lasting impact on the way we work. So the
Mhm.
first article is from they're a private equity firm, a venture capital firm, I'm not sure, but
Yeah, a VC firm,
a
Felicis.
VC firm. Yeah, Felicis, and so what I love about this is this analysis from them is called From Lure to Hell to AI Autopilot, and what's interesting is they're talking about honestly boring IT domains that we talked about forever, and most of us don't talk about much at all because they're considered non-strategic now when they're just the basic, right? So three areas: IT service management, incident response, and QA, and have identified a whole host of companies in each of these domains that are applying AI in interesting ways to potentially realize the future that we have talked about for 20 years of this idea of lights out operations where the system just runs itself. And it's just I'm still not sure, maybe I've been burned too much, that I believe it's really happening, but I do believe that we are going to see an era of transformation, unlike we've seen before in all of these spaces. And And I think it is just going to be fascinating to try to sort all that out. So I don't know what your take on this particular article was.
Yeah, I liked it a lot. And it helps that Felicis has some actual cred in the data world. They are invested in weights and biases, Mother Duck, some of the, these hot analytic and data science type companies. And I always found it challenging when I worked in network services, trying to provide an explanation of root cause analysis for failures or bottlenecks to everybody else, because the language that we would use would not make sense to 95% of the world. And that's just the real reality. So the idea of being able to actually move to systems that simply explain what they're doing and can independently make quick fixes for across the millions or billions of transactional issues that potentially come up. Most of them are honestly meaningless, but a few can cause some real problems. The idea that you could actually have more automated lights out solution to be able to deal with this would be fantastic. And I do see this as one of the great understated use cases for AI. The only problem with this is that it's such a boring topic that it is hard to get the CFO's attention for something like this.
Well, I think there's a couple of
It's
problems.
plumbing,
It's
right?
the only, yeah, and therefore the only real value in it. There's only two value levers that you have to pull in applying the technology, and the first is cost savings, and the second is improved levels of service, which can have very dramatic impacts across all three of these domains. Um, but it's also zero sum, right? The organization already expects the damn things to work, and so simply making them work is hard to get a whole lot of money for from an investment standpoint. And so all of these have a cost ceiling on them that you are only going to be willing to invest so much to solve these problems, and that's the fundamental challenge with it. But if you can read this article, and I highly recommend it, the most meaty part of it is actually the challenges section. So it identifies three big problems with why this has been why these have been such difficult problems to solve for, and I think it nails it. The heterogeneity of our tech stack, right, the uniqueness of these systems make it really, really difficult to apply a piece of generic technology onto it that doesn't truly understand how all these different potential systems connect and interconnect and work, and that can cause gaps. The second is automation. It says automation versus decision making, and this is really this challenge of, with all that complexity in the stack, how do you sort out the false positives, false negatives? Because this is make or break stuff. The first time an AI system fails to catch a problem and you are relying on it to do it is the day you get fired and that system gets ripped out, because there's no excuse, right? And so it's really, really difficult. You have to nail it. And again, so that risk reward. And the last is the inertia, that there's so much money invested in platforms like ServiceNow and Atlassian and PagerDuty. It lists a whole bunch of them. That it's very difficult. So now you are talking about having to layer something on top of those systems to make it work. I think it's very doable, but it again makes it, now it's an additive cost that has to not only justify itself, but what it's underpinning it. And so these are the intractable issues that have stopped this from being real for the last 20 years. And so the question is, can Gen AI actually overcome them finally? That's the question.
Yeah, definitely taking on the likes of ServiceNow and Atlassian. That's a big ask. It's not like they're giving up on trying to be smarter.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and they're going to roll out, and that's the whole issue. They're all rolling out AI solutions as well. They're going to be very ecosystem or centric to their own, and all of those pieces. And so it's going to be an interesting challenge. But I appreciated that someone's talking about these areas, and I appreciated that it was a very, I thought, insightful look at the space.
Yeah.
Speaking of insightful, or at least controversial, another article from Wired. This one was entitled "AI Will Evolve into an Organizational Strategy for All," and the basic premise of this article is making the case that 2025 is going to be the year that we sort of cross the AI chasm, insofar as we go from simply leveraging AI as a tool in the traditional ways to this shift where we start redesigning our organizations to allow for AI and humans to work side by side and re-envision the models. And sorry, I'm probably being a little bit flippant in my little, because we've been talking about this. The RPA vendors started talking about this, the digital worker and redesigning, almost a decade ago, and it's all been complete poppycock. And I'm probably more bullish on the potential for AI to do that and for the potential to see some revised ways. I've been a big proponent of flattening hierarchies in organizations, and technology has always been one of the limiting factors of that. But organizations change very slowly, and these hierarchies were built for a reason. They were designed expressly to avoid and to fight against, to create inertia, to fight against change. um, so I'm to say that this is the big year that all that happens. I'm extremely skeptical. The best I think is that this may be the year that we start to see some shifts, maybe. So I'm
Yeah,
curious
so
what your
this
take is.
article that you mentioned, written in Wired by Ethan Mollick, professor at Wharton. Obviously, he has a vested interest in talking about the use of AI for organizational management. I remember when I was working on my MBA, we definitely spent a lot of time talking about new organizational structures, such as the matrix structure, where you would report to different people based on your
Always
functional
love
role
those.
or productive role. Yes, and but here's the honest truth, like a lot of these HR management systems don't know how to support these types of flexible organizational management tool structures or theoretical structures. We've talked about holacracy, where everybody is supposed to be equal, but then you don't have a great idea of how to direct work. If it's too top down, you have too many bottlenecks. If you don't do enough engagement, sometimes lower level employees never get the teaching that they need to learn how to be mid-level or executive contributors. So it is a lot of complexity that can potentially be brought in by AI. And I could foresee something where you have these direct daily or weekly reports, and then you have perhaps more monthly or high level or strategic structural relationships that AI will help you keep in touch with, that you may not have realized were directly relevant to your work. But in practice, I'm not sure that we have systems that will be able to keep up with the AI recommendations.
Well, I mean, and that's part of I think his point is that AI can, in fact, become. And look, I almost also a believer that we're going to see, CEO or Microsoft Satya Nadella has been talking about this idea of the transformation of the interface itself, using AI to sort of on the fly create interfaces so that you can sort of solve for some of these problems. And part of, I think, his story here is saying that GenAI may be the tool that finally enables that, because that has been, like I said, I've been a big fan of holacracy for a long time. This idea of flattening models and rapid decision making and reorganizing dynamically around solving specific problems and creating that sort of organizational agility that you need to compete in a rapidly changing market. And one of the primary limiting factors has been that our systems were built for the exact opposite. Our systems were built along these hierarchical structures, and they did not allow for that sort of dynamism. I can never say the word.
Dynamicism.
Dynamic. Yes, thank you. Right, they didn't allow for it. And so the premise here is, if I have AI sort of dynamically creating systems and environments of pulling together data from disparate systems to meet the specific needs at any given time, then suddenly you can realize this. Okay, I get that. I buy that. I believe in that. However, he's sort of proposing this idea that AI becomes like a first class player and like on an equal level par, where we're starting to redesign organizations where AI and humans are working together. Well, the challenge with that is that only works if we truly get to AGI, because I always need accountability in this model. And today I cannot hold AI accountable. I can only hold a human accountable, which means I can never have them as equal partners. I always have to have AI be a tool to that human who's making those decisions, because I need to be able to hold someone accountable in any organizational model, even if it's holocratic, right? Until we get to AGI, but even then, the question is, let's say I have artificial general intelligence. Still, how do I hold that AGI accountable? I still think it becomes this open question. So that's where I look at it and go, I love the thought experiment. And I do think if you're a CIO, you should be asking yourself, how can you start redesigning your organization to leverage AI to drive faster business processes and to drive more agility? But I think this article is getting over its skis a little.
Yes, it's quite aspirational, but it does lead to even a bigger picture of looking at how AI is going to affect our view of networks and truth and facts, which leads us to our final insight of the day, coming back to a New York Times article that you shared with me around how the title, the lead, is how hallucinatory AI helps science dream up big breakthroughs, which spoke near and dear to my heart as someone who I started my career protein folding. I did some computational chemistry back in the day. And so it's always great for me to see, oh gosh, I remember dealing with the days when we tried to look at just hundreds of interactions to try to fold a protein and figure out what is theoretically possible. And our computer would spin and whir and overclock and then just kind of stall and just kind of telling you, oh, I cannot deal with this. And now AI is actually doing a much more fantastic job of being able to figure out some of these theoretical proteins.
Well, first of all, you're like a professional cat. You've had 9 lives. Every time we talk, it's like another. I was in politics. I was in this. It's like, are you're really 95 and just look really good for your age or something? I don't understand.
Started when I was 12. Yeah, that's the great thing about being a boy genius. You get to try a lot of things early.
Oh, I see. Okay. Look, I love this article. What I took umbrage with is the use of the term hallucinatory because anyway, when we talk about hallucinations in AI, to me, it means something very, very specific. And that is simply getting the fact wrong because it didn't know and it just made it up. And that is when you talk about hallucinations, that's the damaging. And what they're really talking about is not that it's getting the information wrong, but that it's effectively being creative, that they're using it as a creative tool. You're giving it and saying, how could this work? And it just makes stuff up, but it's making stuff up based on its model. And as part of doing that is coming up with things that the scientists then go test and go, this might actually work. And it's really helping them do what I think one of so we talked earlier about the killer GenAI use case. I actually think this is one of the GenAI killer use cases that we don't give enough credence to, and that is this process to help the creativity. We as humans get trapped in our own frames of mind, in our own mental models of how the world works, of how things function, and we miss connections because we automatically go to that path of least resistance, the neurons that have already been connected that says this is how the world functions. And AI is unburdened by any of that. It just, you give it a question, it just starts looking at connecting the dots and looking at where those patterns exist that we can completely miss. And so what it talked about is that's what they're using it for. And I do the exact same thing. I do so much of the work I do where I'm brainstorming. It's my favorite use of GenAI is I go and I just pump everything I'm working on, I throw it in and said, what am I missing? Or I'm thinking about this. Is there another way of looking at it? And it sometimes just comes up googly gop, and sometimes it's amazing. But never do I consider that a quote unquote hallucination. And so I applaud the article. I hate the use of the term, but I think it's a great thing, a great use of AI that most organizations are really probably not taking nearly enough advantage of.
Yeah, like I'll try to simplify this, but like from a chemistry perspective, one of the things you try to do most often is you have like a sticky piece of a molecule, and then which clumps things up. So when you clump things up, you get things like heart attacks, strokes, Alzheimer's. So you obviously want to cover up that clumpy bit, the sticky bit. And if you're doing this from a human perspective, you might create this 100 atom molecule, and then you switch out one atom at a time to try to figure out if you can make this sticky molecule somewhat better. But with AI, it might say, hey, what if we just do this 20 molecule thing that's shaped completely differently and uses something completely different because it's theoretically possible. And to me, I agree with you. That's not just hallucination. That's looking at the broader world of what is theoretically but physically possible. And that's a fantastic new world to be able to look through instead of having to be simply deal with human expectations, being able to have those moments of actual, frankly, genius that are now possible. And I'm glad that in the article, scientists were also pushing back against calling this hallucinatory, because I agree, hallucinations have both this expectation of fact versus not fact, as well as being a very anthropomorphized version of what AI is doing. It assumes that AI actually has a human view of what we're trying to do in the first place, which it's just not. First of all, let's face it, AI are still computers. They still think of things in a computer way, which means that they are going to make assumptions that you and I are not going to necessarily make, and that's fine. It's just let's just accept that this is a feature rather than a human hallucination.
Yeah, no, exactly. So, like I think it was interesting. It's another great article. Highly recommend you read it. And what it to me the impact was, it just caused me to. I'm already doing a lot of this, but just honestly wanted me to make. I can even do more of this and really use it in these creative ways. So definitely worth the read. So,
Yes.
well, with that, I think we covered everything this week.
Yeah, and I'm glad you're getting your hallucinations from AI rather than ayahuasca or whatever other options there might be out there. Timothy Leary, LSDing.
That's there. There you go.
Yeah, but on that note, thank you so much for joining us to an extended version of This Week in Enterprise Technology. Of course, we had a lot to talk about, and we always find some interesting things to talk about week after week. So please like, subscribe, and join us next week as we figure out what else is happening next for the CIO and CTO offices.